July 6, 1964, Camp Nam Dong, South Vietnam. Before daylight, a reinforced Viet Cong battalion launched a massive attack against a remote Special Forces camp. Mortars exploded throughout the compound. Grenades rained down on defensive positions, and small arms fire tore through the darkness. And in the middle of it all was a 30-year-old United States Army Special Forces captain named Roger Hugh Charles Donlon. Over the next 5 hours, Donlon would be wounded again and again and again and again. Yet he continued moving from position to position, directing the defense and helping his wounded men. His actions that morning would earn him a unique place in American military history. But today we're going to do more than tell his story, because sitting over my right shoulder is a tangible connection to that man. This is an original United States Army uniform that I personally purchased directly from Colonel Donlon. I'm your host, Brandon, with Gung Ho Militaria, and today we're going behind the artifact to remember one of the most extraordinary Green Berets of the Vietnam War. Roger Hugh Charles Donlon was born January 30th, 1934 in Saugerties, Ulster County, New York. But the young man from upstate New York would eventually find himself thousands of miles from home as a member of one of the United States Army's most elite organizations, Special Forces Green Berets. By 1964, Captain Donlon was commanding a Special Forces detachment, a 726 of the 7th Special Forces Group. His destination was Camp Nam Dong in South Vietnam. Nam Dong was a remote outpost near the Laotian border. American Special Forces personnel were working alongside South Vietnamese and other Allied defenders in an increasingly dangerous conflict. And by the summer of 1964, that danger was about to arrive directly at their perimeter. In the early morning darkness of July 6th, the enemy struck. This wasn't a probing attack, it was a major assault intended to overwhelm the camp. A reinforced Viet Cong battalion launched a full-scale pre-dawn attack. Mortars, grenades, and extremely heavy gunfire began hammering the defenders. Buildings caught fire, positions were damaged, men were wounded, and Captain Donlon suddenly found himself commanding a desperate defense against a numerically superior enemy. The battle would continue for approximately 5 hours. As the attack began, Donlon immediately started organizing the defense. One of his first concerns was ammunition. A building containing desperately needed ammunition was burning. Donlon ordered the ammunition removed before it could be destroyed. But then another crisis developed. The enemy was threatening the main gate. Donlon moved through enemy fire and exploding grenades towards the threatened position. Along the way, he encountered a 3-man enemy demolition team near the gate. Donlon engaged and eliminated the threat. But the battle was only beginning. Donlon next attempted to reach a 60mm mortar position. Before he could reach the gun pit, he was hit. He suffered a severe wound to his stomach. For most men, that would have ended their participation in the battle. Not Roger Donlon. When he reached the mortar position, he discovered that most of the men there were wounded as well. Rather than concentrating on his own injuries, Donlon directed their withdrawal to another position, approximately 30 meters away, and then he remained behind to cover their movement. One man couldn't get out. Donlon's team sergeant was unable to evacuate the position, so Donlon crawled towards him. As he began dragging the wounded soldier out, an enemy mortar round exploded nearby. Donlon was again wounded, this time in the left shoulder. He now had serious wounds to his stomach and shoulder, and he still refused to stop. Donlon recovered the abandoned 60mm mortar and moved it approximately 30 meters to another position. There he encountered 3 more wounded defenders. He administered first aid, he encouraged them, then he left the mortar with them and moved towards yet another position. This time he recovered a 57 millimeter recoilless rifle, but weapons without ammunition weren't going to stop the attack, so Donlon went back. He returned to the abandoned gun pit to retrieve ammunition for both weapons. While crawling and dragging the ammunition through the enemy fire, another grenade exploded. Donlon was wounded in the leg. 3 separate wounds, and the battle continued. Despite his physical condition, Donlon crawled approximately 175 meters to an 81 millimeter mortar position. From there, he directed firing operations, protecting the camp's threatened eastern sector. Then he moved again. Donlon continued moving around the perimeter. He threw grenades at enemy positions. He checked on his men. He directed the defense. And perhaps most importantly, he gave the defenders something desperately needed during those terrifying hours: leadership. Then another mortar shell exploded. Donlon was wounded yet again, this time in the face and all over his body. 4 separate wounds during one battle, and still he continued to fight. Eventually, daylight began breaking over Nam Dong. After approximately 5 hours of brutal fighting, the enemy assault weakened. The attackers began withdrawing toward the jungle. The camp had held, but Donlon's job wasn't finished. Despite his own wounds, he reorganized the defenses and helped administer first aid to the wounded. Only after the other wounded men were being evacuated would Donlon himself leave the battlefield. The defense of Nam Dong was over, but the story of what happened there was just beginning. 5 months later, on December 5th, 1964, Roger Donlon stood in the East Ballroom of the White House. President Lyndon B. Johnson presented Captain Roger H.C. Donlon with the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions at Nam Dong. The presentation made history. Donlon became the first service member to receive the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Vietnam War. He also became the first member of the United States Army Special Forces to receive the Medal of Honor. Think about that a moment. The Green Berets would produce countless stories of courage and sacrifice during the Vietnam War, but the first Special Forces Medal of Honor belonged to Roger Donlon, and it came from those desperate 5 hours at Nam Dong. Yet Roger Donlon's military career didn't end with the Medal of Honor. He continued serving his country and ultimately achieved the rank of colonel. He retired from the United States Army in 1988 following more than 30 years of service. Donlon also preserved the history of Nam Dong through his writings, including the books Outpost of Freedom and Beyond Nam Dong, which I have a signed copy of Beyond Nam Dong here. And long after leaving active service, he remained connected to the military community and to generations of soldiers who followed him. And that brings us back to the uniform you see here. This isn't simply a period example that represents the kind of uniform Colonel Donlon might have worn. This uniform plus a letter of provenance came directly from Colonel Roger H.C. Donlon himself. I purchased it directly from him. Concrete provenance like that completely changes the way I look at an artifact. Because when you're holding a uniform connected directly to a man like Roger Donlon, you're holding something that provides a physical connection to his life and service. The fabric can age, the insignia can tarnish. Styles of uniforms eventually disappear from military service, but the history attached to them doesn't have to disappear. That's one of the reasons I believe preserving military artifacts is so important. We're not simply collecting objects, we're preserving the stories of the people who wore them. Colonel Roger H.C. Donlon passed away on January 25th, 2024 in Leavenworth, Kansas. He was 89 years old. His life had taken him from Saugerties, New York, to the jungles of South Vietnam, to the White House, and eventually into the history of the United States Army and the Green Berets. But perhaps the most important part of his legacy isn't simply the medal he received. It's what he did to earn it. When his camp was under attack, when his men were wounded, and when he himself had been wounded repeatedly, he continued leading. That is the story behind this uniform. And that is why artifacts like this deserve to be preserved. If you enjoyed learning about Colonel Roger Donlon and the Battle of Nam Dong, please give this video a like. And if military history, veteran stories, and the artifacts that connect us to the people who lived that history interest you, be sure to subscribe to Gung Ho Military and turn on notifications. I'd like to hear from you. Had you ever heard the story of Roger Donlon and the Battle of Nam Dong before today? Let me know in the comments below, because here at Gung Ho Military, an artifact isn't simply something sitting on a shelf. Every artifact has a story, and our job as collectors is to make sure those stories aren't forgotten. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys next time.